"You're an idiot, old man," my son shouted while his wife watched, eating popcorn. The words hit harder than I expected. I stood frozen for a moment, letting the sting sink in. She smirked, unbothered, casually munching, as if this was some form of entertainment she had been craving. Every laugh, every chew, every glance felt like a dagger slicing through years of patience and quiet effort. I didn't speak. I didn't react. I only observed, calm on the surface, while inside, a storm of thought and quiet anger brewed. For decades, I had carried the weight of this family silently. Every decision, every responsibility, every sleepless night, every quiet compromise, I had taken it all upon myself so they could live in comfort, thinking the world belonged to them without realizing who built it. And now, here was my son, throwing insults at me in my own living room, thinking he had all the power while his wife sat there like an amused audience. He strutted past me, chest puffed, trying to demonstrate dominance. And I let him. I let him believe he had conquered the room. Because the truth was, he had no idea what he was stepping into. Every small thing I had done, the bills I had quietly organized, the schedules I had meticulously managed, the countless crises I had handled alone, had prepared me for this exact moment. Every unseen effort, every quiet sacrifice, every hidden action was about to pay off in a way they would never forget. I moved silently through the house, feeling the familiar rhythm of it all, the quiet creak of the floorboards, the subtle hum of the heater, the faint smell of coffee lingering from the morning. It was in these small details, unnoticed by him, that I had built my domain. And now, those very details would become my tools. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. I only needed patience. The anger in me wasn't rash. It was precise. It simmered, controlled, like the careful heat beneath a pot about to boil. Every gesture he made, every arrogant glance from his wife, every mocking tone sharpened my resolve. They had no idea that the idiot old man they mocked had spent decades learning, planning, and protecting not just the family, but the foundations of everything they took for granted. I paused in the hallway, hearing their laughter echo. I let it ring. Let them revel in their arrogance. Let them feel invincible for a few hours, a few minutes even. Because soon, they would wake up to a reality they hadn't even considered. Everything they thought they controlled would slip through their fingers like sand. And I would be there not as the defeated parent, not as the man they dismissed, but as the architect of the reckoning they could not escape. I moved to my study, quietly opening drawers and reviewing papers I had kept meticulously organized over the years. Every document, every account, every investment, every asset, they had relied on me silently all their lives. And now, those assets would shift under their feet. I traced the lines of numbers, contracts, and account names, feeling a strange calm wash over me. This wasn't about revenge for anger's sake. It was about justice, precision, and teaching them a lesson they would never forget. As the evening sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, I felt the familiar clarity that came before action. I remembered every insult, every slight, every time my guidance was ignored, every moment my sacrifices were dismissed. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, their world would be different. Their arrogance would be broken. Their laughter would vanish under the weight of consequences they had never prepared for. I walked slowly through the house, stopping briefly to glance at old photographs on the wall. Images of family events, birthdays, vacations, all carefully preserved memories. I didn't feel sentimental. I felt a quiet resolve. They had enjoyed my presence only when it suited them. Now they would experience absence, accountability, and the unraveling of everything they thought they controlled. Night fell, and I moved quietly into the kitchen. I made tea, humming softly to myself, listening to the distant sound of the city outside. It was a sound that reminded me of the patience I had cultivated over decades. I sat in the living room, the silence pressing in, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the room where they had humiliated me. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring not triumph, but the calm before it, the stillness before the storm. By midnight, I had planned every detail. Every account to freeze, every asset to redirect, every document to reveal. They would wake to a world where their arrogance was meaningless, where their disrespect would have a price, and where the idiot old man they mocked would prove to be the one who held all the power. And so I waited, quietly, patiently, calmly, because power, when earned and maintained, does not need to shout. It does not need to rage. It waits, and strikes only when the moment is perfect. The next morning came quietly, almost too quietly. I woke before the sun, as I always did, letting the soft early light settle across the kitchen while the coffee brewed. The house felt different, still mine, still filled with the quiet order I maintained, but the weight of last night hung in the air like a slow-forming storm. I sat at the table with my coffee, steady and calm, knowing exactly what needed to happen next. Their voices eventually drifted from upstairs, my son groaning awake, his wife laughing at something on her phone. I heard them moving around, completely unaware that the next few hours would turn their confident world into something they could know longer control. I stayed seated when he came down the stairs. He didn't greet me, didn't even glance my way. He walked past me like I was the help, like I was some inconvenient background object cluttering his life. I didn't speak. I only observed, letting the last pieces of my resolve harden into place. After they left for the day, the house fell silent again. I moved through the rooms, gathering everything I had set aside the night before: folders, keys, documents, access cards. Each item carried weight. Each one represented a door he never knew I still held the key to. My son liked to pretend he had taken over everything years ago. He never realized I had left him just enough responsibility to keep him busy, while keeping the real control tucked neatly behind the scenes. He was too proud to ask questions, too eager to claim success he didn't earn, and far too blind to understand what true ownership looked like. I drove downtown, the morning traffic slow and steady. The city was waking up, unaware that a very specific kind of collapse was already in motion. I walked into the building where everything had begun decades earlier, the place I built from scratch, brick by brick, signature by signature. The employees still nodded respectfully when they saw me. Some even greeted me by name. They remembered. They knew who had built the foundation. My son's arrogance had never reached them. I sat with the financial director first. She was an organized woman who had watched my son make one careless decision after another. She wasn't surprised when I told her I needed access restored to the accounts he thought were exclusively his. She only nodded and began typing. Within minutes, the landscape shifted. His credit lines frozen, his personal accounts secured, his luxury bills redirected. Every outstanding cost he ignored finally collected. And the house he lived in so proudly? I initiated the paperwork to transfer it back to my direct ownership, not out of spite, not out of cruelty, out of principle, out of clarity, out of the need to show him what responsibility actually meant. My next meeting was with the legal team. They had watched my son's patterns with concern for years. When I explained what happened the night before, they didn't question me. They only outlined the steps, each one precise, each one carrying consequences he had never imagined. By the time I left the office, every financial and operational link he depended on was tied back to me. He thought he owned the world. He didn't realize he was living in mine. I returned home early afternoon. The rooms felt lighter, quieter, almost cleaner somehow. I sat on the couch, letting that silence sink in. I wasn't happy. I wasn't proud. I wasn't vindictive. I was simply done. Done being dismissed. Done being shouted at. Done watching him waste everything he had been given, later that day, my phone buzzed. It was a message from him, short, annoyed, confused. "Dad, did you change something with the accounts? My card isn't working." I didn't respond. Another message came 5 minutes later, longer, more irritated. "What's going on? I have things to pay for." Still, I said nothing. By evening, the tone shifted. He called twice. Then again. His wife sent a message too, demanding answers in a way that made it painfully clear she had never respected me. I didn't reply to her either. Instead, I set the phone down, walked out to the back porch, and sat quietly as the sun dipped below the horizon. The warm air moved gently across the yard, the kind of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. I listened to the crickets starting their nightly song and let the quiet wash over me. Their confusion was the beginning. Their fear would come next. Their collapse was already unfolding. I took a slow breath, steady and certain. Whatever came tomorrow, I knew the balance of power had finally shifted back to where it belonged. By the third morning, the tension in my son's world had shifted from confusion to panic. I watched quietly from my study window as his car pulled into the driveway, not his usual confident stride, but hesitant, unsure, almost desperate. I didn't move. I didn't call him. I let him feel the weight of every decision he had made and every moment he had ignored me. He walked up to the front door, fumbling with his keys as if the house itself had betrayed him. And in a sense, it had. The accounts he had always taken for granted were no longer accessible. The resources he thought were untouchable were suddenly locked. Even his personal lines of credit, the ones he had used to flaunt wealth and power, had been redirected. He had no idea what had changed, only that something was deeply, terrifyingly wrong. His wife hovered behind him, usually the brash, laughing spectator, now visibly unsettled. The confidence she carried, the smug amusement at my expense, was gone. I could see her trying to calculate what had happened, her fingers nervously tapping her phone, no longer entertaining herself with my humiliation. Their roles had reversed in subtle, frightening ways, and it was only the beginning. He banged on the door once, then again. The sound echoed faintly through the house, a staccato reminder of the power he had thought he wielded. I didn't answer. Instead, I continued my work, reviewing accounts and documents I had quietly prepared months in advance. Every asset, every detail he had assumed was his, was now carefully monitored and controlled. Minutes passed like hours. The sun climbed higher, and with it, the heat of his anxiety grew. I heard a muttered curse as he realized the first of many surprises. His company accounts, the ones he had bragged about, were inaccessible. Emails bounced back. Payments failed. Contracts he had promised to deliver were stalled. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, trying to understand how this could happen. Then came the first call. He didn't hide it this time. He shouted, pleaded, demanded answers. But I remained silent. I let him unravel, letting him realize that the idiot old man he had mocked was the one orchestrating his collapse with precision. The more he raged, the calmer I became. Anger was a luxury I no longer needed. Clarity was my weapon. His wife too started to falter. The smug, eating popcorn confidence evaporated, replaced by frantic whispers, sharp glances at him, and the occasional panicked glance at the driveway. They were trapped in a world they didn't understand, and every step they took only tightened the noose I had slowly prepared. By midday, word had reached other family members and business associates. Subtle, precise conversations revealed mistakes they had ignored for years. Vendors questioned invoices. Clients noticed inconsistencies. Calls started flooding in, not just from my son and his wife, but from everyone who relied on the systems he had mismanaged. Panic spread like wildfire. I watched quietly, occasionally glancing at the clock. Each missed call, each panicked text, each failed transaction was a small victory, a calculated piece of the lesson they had refused to learn. I wasn't gloating. I was delivering a truth they had ignored, that arrogance, carelessness, and disrespect carry consequences. And the lesson was coming due. By evening, they were cornered. My son had called repeatedly, begging, pleading, shouting, even threatening. Nothing worked. His wife, who had laughed at my expense only days before, now tried desperately to negotiate, to salvage something from the ruins. But the foundation I had built, the knowledge, control, and preparation I had maintained quietly all these years, allowed me to remain unshaken. They came to my door finally, faces pale, eyes wide with fear and disbelief, their composure shattered. I didn't rise to meet them. I didn't speak. I let them stand there, feeling the weight of their own failures. Every second of hesitation, every word of confusion, every panicked glance only reinforced the lesson I had been silently teaching for decades. For hours, they begged. They pleaded. They tried to bargain. They shouted, insulted, and accused. I stayed calm, letting the storm pass over me. Each attempt to manipulate or frighten me fell flat. In those moments, I realized the full measure of my quiet power. They had underestimated me for years, and that arrogance was their undoing. By the time night fell, I had ensured that every resource, every financial instrument, every decision they had tried to claim as their own was securely under control, or in some cases, irreversibly redirected. They had finally learned what it meant to underestimate the man they had mocked, insulted, and disrespected. Sitting back in my chair, I watched as they left my house in silent, heavy defeat. The laughter was gone. The smug amusement was gone. All that remained was the quiet realization of the consequences of their actions and the knowledge that the idiot old man they had mocked was the only one who had truly held power all along. The next morning, the silence was heavy. My son and his wife didn't come barging in, didn't shout, didn't even glance my way. Their world had already shifted overnight, but the final pieces of the reckoning were yet to settle. I moved quietly through the house, observing the calm that came naturally to me, contrasting sharply with the chaos they had left behind in every account. Every document, every plan they had tried to manipulate. I could feel it, every action. Every decision I had made over the last few days had set in motion a series of consequences they could not undo. And I watched patiently as their panic and confusion deepened. Phone calls that once commanded attention went unanswered. Emails that used to flow smoothly bounced back. Meetings they had assumed were under control were abruptly canceled. Every line of control they had taken for granted now belonged to me, and the gravity of it finally sank in for them. By mid-morning, they appeared at the door, desperate, almost pleading. Their faces were pale, eyes wide, lips trembling as they struggled to form coherent sentences. My son stammered through explanations, excuses, threats even, but I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I let them feel the weight of every insult, every dismissive word they had thrown at me over the years. The room itself seemed to amplify their fear, the quiet, controlled environment, a stark contrast to their own unraveling. His wife tried to interject, attempting to blame circumstances, mismanagement, or external factors, but I remained calm. I simply let her words hang, unanswered. Each second of silence pressed down on them, revealing the depth of their mistakes. They had believed that power, money, and arrogance could shield them from accountability. They had been wrong. They had underestimated the man they had called an idiot old man. Hours passed, and they grew frantic. Calls to associates went ignored. Clients demanded explanations. Vendors refused further service. Every privilege they had assumed was gone, redirected, or frozen. I had not acted in anger. I had acted with precision. Every step had been measured, every consequence carefully orchestrated. And in that orchestration, they finally saw the truth. respect is earned, not inherited. And arrogance never goes unpunished. Finally, when their energy waned and desperation gave way to quiet acceptance, I spoke. Not harshly, not vindictively, but with the calm authority of decades lived with integrity. I gave you every chance to respect your family. I gave you every opportunity to act responsibly. You chose arrogance, mockery, and disregard. Now you will live with the consequences. The weight of those words fell heavily, carrying the gravity of years spent teaching, guiding, and protecting. My son's shoulders slumped. His wife's smirk was gone, replaced by an uneasy awareness that their previous confidence had been nothing but a fragile illusion. And I realized in that quiet moment that power and control are not measured by wealth or position. They are measured by patience, wisdom, and the ability to act decisively when the time comes. By evening, the last messages of panic had slowed to silence. They retreated from my doorstep, no longer confident, no longer assured. The world they had thought they controlled had collapsed not through anger, not through shouting, but through steady, deliberate action and unwavering resolve. I remained calm, reflecting quietly on the lessons I had imparted through my actions. Respect, responsibility, and integrity could not be mocked without consequence. Sitting alone in my study, I looked around the home I had maintained with care for decades. Everything was in its place, serene, balanced. And I felt a quiet satisfaction not from revenge itself, but from the restoration of order, fairness, and the affirmation of values that had been ignored for too long. They had learned their lesson in the hardest way possible, and I had proved once and for all that true authority lies not in loud words or flashy gestures, but in patience, preparation, and moral certainty. As the night settled, I poured myself a cup of tea and looked out at the city lights. The storm had passed, the house was calm, and the lesson was complete. They would carry the memory of this reckoning for the rest of their lives. And I, the so-called idiot old man, could finally rest, knowing that justice, silent, measured, and precise, had been delivered. The quiet weight of those days lingered with me. I had acted not out of anger, but out of clarity. And in that clarity, I found not only vindication, but the affirmation that true wisdom, respect, and authority could never be mocked without consequence.